had thought that a mass tasting would help me better understand the style of this year's crop, but what's hitting me hardest is how alcoholic these wines are. I'm already feeling hot under the collar with just a few samples. Don't get me wrong, though, I like alcohol. It makes me happy and stops me from being the tightly wound control freak as some people so unjustly characterize me. After we've shared a few glasses, I forgive these people. I'm so benevolent. Increasingly, though, I find that many wines today are too potent. To me, it's simply alien when a Pinot Noir tastes like port, or I have to put it in the fridge before drinking it to numb the alcoholic heat. If I just wanted booze, I'd have a martini. But I drink wine for its taste, so the last thing I need is a blowtorch finish of bathtub gin. Do you have a thirst to learn about wine? Do you love stories about wonderfully obsessive people, hauntingly beautiful places, and amusingly awkward social situations? Well, that's the blend here on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm your host, Natalie McLean, and each week I share with you unfiltered conversations with celebrities in the wine world, as well as confessions from my own tipsy journey as I write my third book on this subject. I'm so glad you're here. Now pass me that bottle, please, and let's get started. Welcome to episode 114. You want to seduce someone this Valentine's Day? Well, forget lingerie, lipstick, and even those silk tie handcuffs. Just ensure that the object of your desire drinks a little wine. Researchers at Glasgow University have discovered that if you consume just 2 glasses of wine, members of the opposite sex appear more attractive by about 25%. Over a few glasses of wine, love is blind, or at least it's wearing rosé-colored glasses. Perhaps that's why it's one of the greatest social lubricants. Wine has certainly done more to keep marriages together than beer. And I think that's because wine embodies physical pleasure. Mixed with pheromones, its aromas are a heady blend, and its velvet caress on the tongue both soothes and excites. What other drink is described as voluptuous and curvaceous? Naughty Frenchmen say the sturdy shape of a Bordeaux bottle reminds them of their wives, but the curvilinear Burgundy bottles conjure up their mistresses. So forget the line about candy is dandy or even liquor is quicker. Women find gifts of wine romantic. That's exactly what you'll discover in this episode of the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm going solo on this one and chatting with you not only about wine for V-Day, but we're also going to turn up the heat and talk about the rising levels of alcohol in wine. In the show notes, you'll find the full transcript, how you can join me in a free online wine and food pairing class, where you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube Live every Wednesday at 7 p.m. That's all in the show notes at nataliemclain.com/114. I'm hosting virtual wine and chocolate pairing classes for several corporate groups and other organizations, not just for Valentine's Day, but also throughout the year. As well, I'm hosting wine and cheese tastings. So if you're interested in my doing this for your group, please email me at natalie@nataliemclain.com. And you'll also find my contact in the show notes. Okay, on with the show. The research firm CyberPlus found that 59% of women ages 21 to 39 wish their sweethearts would give them wine, not candy, on Valentine's Day. And London's Sunday Times reported that wine tastings rank above all other venues for finding a date. The reason? Wine means spending time together. But if you want to give both bonbons and bottles, keep in mind that death by chocolate isn't just a dessert. It's a way of killing your wine, too. Chocolate can dull the taste of wine or even make it taste bitter, unless you select wines that are sweeter than the chocolate. Late harvest and botrytized wines from Canada and other New World countries make excellent matches for sweet desserts, as do ice wines. And port not only has sufficient sweetness to stand up to the richness of chocolate or creme brulee, but it also has the opulent texture. We talked about pairing wine and chocolate in depth with chocolate sommelier Roxanne Browning in episode 109, and you'll find more tips in episode 50. If you really want to make your honey weak in the knees, nothing comes closer to the hearts and roses theme than the pink pearls of sparkling rosé. Real men and women do drink pink, particularly for the intoxicating scent of strawberries that tickle our noses. Try not to overdo it. As Shakespeare said of wine, quote, "It provokes the desire, but takes away the performance," end quote. So if things don't work out with your amour, you can always drown your sorrow in a glass of Pinot Noir. Be forewarned, though, Pinot Noir is one of the most difficult and expensive grapes to grow, and that's why it's known as the heartbreak grape. So let's make that magical transition now to high alcohol wines based on my experience at a wine tasting a while back. My head pounds, my lips burn, my teeth sting. How could I have been so naive? When the invitation arrived for a tasting of 200 blockbuster reds from the new vintage, I was pleased and even a bit excited. Now I feel as though I've spent 2 hours with a drill-crazed dentist who thinks anesthetic is for wimps. At this tasting, 5 local importers are showcasing their wines to a handful of writers. The room is thick with the sweet smell of alcohol. On a long table in front of me, there are 65 bottles of powerhouse Australian Shiraz. The next table has just as many robust Californian Zinfandels. Past that point, my field of vision starts to blur. To get through so many wines, I can't spend more than a minute or two on each, so I throw myself into the task anyway. It's just 9 a.m. I had thought that a mass tasting would help me better understand the style of this year's crop, but what's hitting me hardest is how alcoholic these wines are. I'm already feeling hot under the collar with just a few samples. Don't get me wrong, though, I like alcohol. It makes me happy and stops me from being the tightly wound control freak as some people so unjustly characterize me. After we've shared a few glasses, I forgive these people. I'm so benevolent. Increasingly, though, I find that many wines today are too potent. To me, it's simply alien when a Pinot Noir tastes like port, or I have to put it in the fridge before drinking it to numb the alcoholic heat. If I just wanted booze, I'd have a martini. But I drink wine for its taste, so the last thing I need is a blowtorch finish of bathtub gin. It's also tiring on the palate and the body. After a few glasses of high-octane wine at home, I can't taste food anymore. After dinner, when I watch CSI, I usually wake up just as they're nailing the bad guy. I'm a victim of the wine's blunt force trauma. Yet wines weren't always this alcoholic. In the 1970s, for instance, 2 of the most popular wines were the German whites, Blue Nun and Black Tower, with only 8 or 9% alcohol. 10 to 12% used to be the norm for reds, but in North America today, some blockbuster wines now go as high as 14 to 16%. Why is that? One reason is changing consumer taste. Back in the 1980s and 90s, drinkers who become accustomed to strong cocktails preferred robust red wine. Red wine grapes are usually picked later in the season than white ones, so the resulting wine is often more alcoholic. But what other factors are fueling the trend? Is it vintner choices, wine critic ratings, or some other reason? To answer these questions, it helps to understand first what alcohol is and what it does for wine. Back in Europe in the 15th century, authorities determined alcoholic strength by dipping a rag soaked in wine, beer, or spirit, then lighting it. If it burned brightly, the liquid was alcoholic. If not, it was too dilute. As a later refinement, they mixed gunpowder with the alcohol before lighting it, and if it flamed, it was proved as alcohol. A small explosion was considered strong proof. In the later 1700s, when governments started taxing alcohol based on its proof, precise measurement was needed. French scientist Joseph-Louis Gay-Lussac developed a formula to determine the percentage of pure ethanol in wine using the recently invented hydrometer. Regardless of a wine's style, alcohol is the skeleton that supports its tannin, texture, aroma, and acidity. Alcohol is also the solvent that extracts flavor compounds from the grape juice and helps to make them airborne so that we can actually smell those aromas. When we swirl a glass of wine, alcohol coats the sides of the glass and then evaporates. This releases the wine's fragrant organic compounds, or to use the jargon, it volatilizes the esters. Wine lovers refer to this coating of their glass as tears or legs. The higher the alcohol, the slower and more distinct the tears. This doesn't indicate a better wine, just a more alcoholic one. This Venus fact is even mentioned in the Bible. Proverbs 23:31 advises the devout not to, quote, gulp down the wine, the strong red wine when droplets form on the side of the cup, end quote. I wonder if that's what they mean by no more tears in heaven. Although ethanol in wine is odorless and tasteless, it gives us the impression of sweetness. That's why a full-bodied wine that's completely dry can still taste sweet. That may be why high-alcohol wines are so popular. They're technically dry and hence perceived as sophisticated, but they still taste like jam. We talk dry but drink sweet. On the palate, alcohol gives wine body or weight, that luxurious, rounded texture called mouthfeel. Too little alcohol makes a wine feel thin and watery, like skim milk. Too much can make it feel heavy and thick, like cream. But when alcohol is balanced with flavor, tannins, and acidity, the wine feels like whole milk. But if the wine is balanced, some connoisseurs argue, high alcohol is not a problem. They also say that high alcohol is vital to wines with rich flavors and strong tannins, enabling it to be consumed without aging. Otherwise, drinkers would have to wait years for all of the wine's disjointed elements to knit together. They also claim that it's unfair to judge New World wines by Old World standards. Wines from warm climates, they point out, are being true to their locale by being riper and more alcoholic. Grapes in these regions, such as Zinfandel, Shiraz, and Grenache, only start to express themselves at 14 or 15% alcohol. Similarly, Chardonnay from these areas at 12% alcohol could taste green and stemmy, and maybe better at 14 or 15%. But I often find those Chardonnays can taste like rotting bananas. The price of power is finesse. The best ballet dancers have powerful thighs and calves to lift themselves, but they also have lean arms and beautiful points that create long, elegant lines. I admire this effortless length in wine as well. Of course, some wines have high alcohol for stylistic reasons. Italian Amarone, for example, achieves 14 to 16% alcohol from the traditional process of drying grapes on straw mats to concentrate their sugars and flavors before fermenting them. In fact, Amarone is the only wine in the world to have a legal minimum required alcohol level, which is 14%. The Italians wisely view Amarone as a wine to drink at the end of the meal, rather than one to accompany food. They call it vino da meditazione, a wine for meditation. This raisoning technique is catching on with New World vintners too, who now use it to add power to their wines. Other wines are naturally powerful too. Châteauneuf de Pape, for instance, from the Rhone Valley in France, normally clocks in at 14 to 15%. These wines are made from a blend of up to 13 grapes, including Grenache and Syrah, that don't achieve much depth of flavor until they've been left on the vine longer than early ripening varieties. This longer growing period produces more sugar, which converts to higher alcohol. Some wines can carry more alcohol because their other elements support it, the way tall people can easily hide extra pounds. Examples include white wines made from grapes such as Chenin Blanc, Marsanne, and Viognier. Their deep, rich fruit flavors and vibrant acidity balance their strength. Dessert wines can also get away with more alcohol because their sweetness tempers their heat. Wines with lower alcohol are usually made in cool climates. White wine examples include Champagne, along with sparkling wines from other regions, Riesling from Washington State, Canada, Germany, and Alsace, Gruner Veltliner from Austria, and Muscat from regions that make it. Among red wines, examples are Pinot Noir from Burgundy, Germany, Oregon, New Zealand, and Canada, Gamay from Beaujolais and Canada, Cabernet Franc from Canada, the Loire Valley, and Italian reds from the Trentino Alto Adigio Friuli region, as well as Valpolicella. Even regions generally considered warm have their cool areas, such as Australia's Adelaide Hills, Tasmania, and the Clare, Yarra, and Eden Valleys, and California's Carneros region and the Sonoma Coast, as well as Russian River and Anderson Valleys. Wines from those vineyards often achieve a balancing acidity because their grapes are exposed to the moderating influences of cool breezes and morning mists from water or mountains. Some warm regions deliberately create wines with lower alcohol for stylistic reasons, such as the Greek Acertico and Portuguese Vinho Verde. Italian Moscato d'Asti, with its lovely orange blossom aroma and light effervescence, is perfect refreshment for a hot summer day at just 5.5% alcohol. But most of the extremely alcoholic wines today are produced in warm areas of New World regions, including Australia, South Africa, California, Chile, and Argentina. Modern irrigation technology allows vines to grow in areas that were previously considered too hot. These sun-baked grapes make round, ripe, alcoholic wines. Another factor is blends versus single grape wines. French winemakers have traditionally blended grapes to balance the fruit flavor with the acidity and tannin, whereas many New World producers have promoted their single grape wines as brands. Think Chardonnay, Cabernet, Merlot, all with their signature flavors. These latter wines are often described as high impact, fruit bombs, or expressive. Personally, I've never liked them because they can taste flabby, jammy, or dull, kind of like lemonade without the zest of the lemons. Still, I know it's unfair to accuse only New World wine of this habit. Many Old World countries, such as France, Italy, and Spain, are doing the same thing today and marketing them as modern, revitalized styles. Even Bordeaux, that paragon of elegance, has become increasingly alcoholic. In the 1970s, few Bordeaux wines had more than 12% alcohol. But that resulted in green, stemmy, underripe wines during cool or wet years. However, the hot 1982 vintage created a style that was far richer and more alcoholic than ever before, prompting the U.S. wine critic Robert Parker to declare it the vintage of the century, thereby launching his own professional reputation. Since then, Bordeaux seems to be averaging 13% or higher, especially with the expensive garage wines made in small lots from Saint-Emilion. Some drinkers have the misguided notion that all white wines are lower in alcohol than reds. That kind of delusional thinking is why so many people, like me, choose to drink white at lunch, believing that we're showing some sort of restraint. Ha! After just one glass of full-throttle California Chardonnay, which can taste like a tropical fruit salad slathered in butter, I need a long afternoon nap. The upside is waking up refreshed just in time for evening cocktails. A nap is what I could use right now, even though the wine tasting is in full swing and it's not yet noon. Although I dutifully expectorate, spit, each mouthful of wine after I taste it, I sometimes do allow a small amount of the best wines to trickle down my throat to test their finish. I'm very thorough with this sort of thing. As well, a little bit of alcohol is always absorbed through the skin of my mouth and throat, the soft palate, if you will. So for every 50 samples I taste, I probably consume the equivalent of a glass of wine. I'm guessing, but it adds up. As the day wears on, my spitting technique becomes less refined. And between that and my increasing enthusiasm for swirling my samples, the purple-stained napkins are piling up around me. My voice rises and my carefree laugh floats across the room until someone inevitably asks, "Enjoying yourself, Natalie?" Okay, where was I? Oh yes, back to the vineyard, talking about grapes. Ripeness is all, as Shakespeare once said, and a growing number of winemakers agree. But how ripe is too ripe? Since 1920, the sugar content of grapes has been assessed with a tool called a spectrometer, which measures degrees of Brix, or Beaumet, or Auchlès, or KMW, depending on the region. In the 1980s, most California vintners picked their grapes when they had achieved about 23 Brix. That crept up to almost 25 Brix over the years. That alone translates a rise in alcohol from about 13% to 15%. So getting uptight about a few percentage points may seem neurotic. Hey, but think about two wines. One is 12% alcohol, the other is 16%. Now, would you rather have 3 glasses of the first wine or just 2 glasses of the second? It comes out to the same amount of alcohol. While we may not notice alcohol creeping up over the years, the result is a bit like the experiment in which the heat was slowly increased under the frog in a pot of water. Eventually, we too become cooked, or at least our brain does. What's happening is that winemakers have stopped relying solely on their Brix readings to know when to pick their grapes and are instead tasting them for maturity. And that can be a good thing, too. As grapes ripen, their seeds turn from green to brown, their skins thicken and develop more flavor and color, and their rasping tannins soften. It's a process called verasion. Fruit flavors mature from a puckery vegetative green to ripe fresh fruit, and then they keep going to overly ripe jam and chocolate, and finally to cooked or burnt. Think of those rotting bananas. Rather than considering sugar content, vintners now assess the overall physical ripeness of the fruit's flesh, seeds, and skins by tasting. This phenolic maturity relates to the development of natural compounds in wines that are responsible for the wine's eventual aroma, color, flavor, bitterness, texture, and astringency. Therefore, vintners have started leaving grapes on their vines longer in the fall, a waiting period called hang time. That's because phenolic ripeness is more a function of time than of heat. I liken the sugar in grapes to the intelligence quotient, IQ, in people, and the phenolic ripeness or maturity to the emotional quotient, or EQ. Even young children can have a high IQ, but only with time do they develop the wisdom that equates to a high EQ. On top of these changes, another factor influencing ripeness may be global warming, or climate change if you prefer. The Earth's climate has fluctuated for centuries, but some scientists believe that it's never before shown such rapid temperature increases. According to the American writer Tim Flannery, who wrote The Weathermakers, 9 of the 10 hottest years on record have occurred in the last decade. Aubert de Villaine, the winemaker for the famed Burgundy Romanée-Conti, notes that harvest dates have moved back by about a week per year since the 1970s. Grapes are now picked in mid or late September. Later harvesting isn't the only factor boosting alcohol in some New World vineyards. In the 80s and 90s, after the phylloxera root louse destroyed many California vineyards, they were replanted using European-style trellising and canopy management. This exposes the grapes to more sunlight, speeding up their metabolic process. Modern vines, custom grafted in the nursery, also photosynthesize sunshine into sugar far more efficiently than their ancestors. Some vintners choose certain clones of grapes that highlight the black fruit flavors in wine, making them taste more robust, and in my opinion, sometimes appallingly uniform. Another technique that growers use is green harvesting. Slow ripening bunches of grapes are pulled off the vines and discarded. This forces the vines to concentrate their nutrients in the remaining grapes. Even in regions where irrigation is legal, some producers choose to dry farm their vines so that the grapes dehydrate, further concentrating their flavors. Done early in the season, this makes the vines conserve their nutrients for their fruit rather than wasting them on leaves. This is actually one of the few natural ways to develop the phenolics of the fruit earlier, and thus to balance the sugar and phenolic development. They may also try other natural approaches, such as using rootstocks and clones that aren't too vigorous, trellising the vines to make them work for their nutrients, removing shoots and leaves early in the season to concentrate the nutrients, and using yeasts that ferment the wine at a lower level of alcohol. But for many producers, especially those in warm climates, the natural way of reducing alcohol is either difficult or expensive. Another advance that helps to keep the grapes on the vines longer, especially in damp, cool regions, is better sprays against rot, mildew, and fungal diseases. Viruses that once attacked vine leaves have almost been eliminated, so the leaves stay green and keep absorbing sunlight through the entire growing season. Once the grapes are picked and taken to the winery, other factors can increase alcohol. In some regions, vintners can legally add sugar to fermenting wine to increase its alcohol. It's a practice called chaptalization. This is legal, especially in cool climates where the grapes don't often ripen, but not in others. Some critics liken feeding sugar to yeast cells like force-feeding geese to make foie gras. Even the yeasts themselves are changing. 10 years ago, most natural yeasts produced about 13% alcohol from grapes, harvested at 24% Brix. But modern cultured strains can convert that same sugar up to 14.8%. These Godzilla yeasts can also survive high alcohol environments of 16% or more, which kill natural yeasts. The fermentation vessel is changing too. In the 1970s, open fermenters always lost some alcohol due to evaporation. Today's closed steel fermenters avoid that leakage and result in a degree or two more of alcohol. During fermentation, some producers concentrate the grape must further by draining water away from it. Some say this is a necessity, especially after a wet harvest, when grapes are bloated with rain. Others condemn it as a lazy fix for vintners who overcrop their vines, then force concentration back into the wine. However, this practice seems well entrenched. It's estimated there are more than 2,000 vacuum concentrators in Bordeaux alone, including those at some of the more august chateaux. The post-fermentation aging phase can also increase alcohol. Some water always evaporates out of the wooden barrels, further concentrating the wine as much as 1%. This is often called the angel's share. Wines bottled immediately after fermentation don't have this issue. The problem is that all these technologies and techniques are becoming standard procedures rather than ways to occasionally correct a technical or climactic problem. Enology programs, such as the one at the University of California at Davis, have been blamed for training winemakers that create technologically optimized wines. I do think that's an unfair blanket statement. Back to the tasting. By this time, I'm on my 51st Zinfandel and starting to feel thoroughly optimized myself. Maybe marathon tasting isn't so bad after all. Perhaps wine tasters are just like runners. Eventually the endorphins kick in and you break through the pain barrier and just go with the flow, the momentum. That seems to be the case for most of my colleagues, as the clatter in the room is now very cheerful and loud, and their pink faces all radiate goodwill. A flowering tenderness floods me with love for all of these beautiful people. Still, there's no denying that these wines are punishing. Like so many today, they're both alcoholic and oaky. These termite specials club your palate until it's numb and assault you with flavors and tannins that haven't yet smoothed out. If the death of elegance had a taste, this would be it. You might argue that vintners aren't creating these styles in a vacuum. Rather, they're responding to consumer demand. That demand, in turn, is driven by critics' ratings, darn them again, particularly those of Robert Parker. He's now retired, but he had a large influence not so long ago. Winemakers who craft their wines to his apparent taste for denser, darker, alcoholic wines were said to Parkerize them. Competition medals have a similar effect in Australia, where they have more than 40 wine shows a year. There, too, high scores are often accorded to big wines that taste good by themselves without food. Some vintners claim that Parker's reviews just reflect the ratcheting up of our entire sensory environment. Bigger explosions in movies, more violent television programs, saltier meals, and bigger wines. The special effects have obliterated the plot. Well, why is big considered better? Have we all turned into shock jocks when it comes to wine? Are even the grand old wines in danger of becoming caricatures of themselves, the way aging comics awkwardly insert hip lingo into their routines? These are all questions I ponder now as I move to the next table. It groans under the weight of 72 Chilean Cabernets, making me wonder whether there should be breathalyzers at wine tastings. Yes, I'm still spitting, don't worry. And I do not drink and drive. It strikes me that we've confused power with concentration, strength with quality. That's why some drinkers now believe that a wine can't be serious without big body and high alcohol, just as some people believe that a novel of fewer than 200 pages can't be good literature. Most of us don't want to eat food that's so hot it hurts, or a dish with just one dominant flavor. So why would we want our wine to taste that way? Big wine obliterates the taste of whatever it accompanies, much like dousing everything you eat with ketchup or salt. These wines don't complement food, California vintner Paul Ridge observes, except maybe wild boar, preferably still alive. Australian scientists proved that when alcohol gets high enough, it obscures wine's character. The study focused on Gewürztraminers and Bordeaux reds and found that excessive alcohol covers the flavor components that distinguish wines. Most tasters in the study couldn't identify the wine type. It's not that I won't drink alcoholic wines, but sparingly, just as I don't eat chocolate cake for dessert every night. Acidity alone gives us that refreshing sensation, cleansing the palate so that each bite of food approaches the deliciousness of the first one. That's great dining, not quick satiety, but prolonged pleasure. Acidity is also the primary element that enables wines to age, hence the debate about whether some New World Chardonnays and Cabernets can age well because they often don't have enough acidity to balance their other components. California enologist George Vieira divides wines into social wines, consumed on their own, and table wines, which are partners for food. I, too, like different styles of wines for different purposes. For an aperitif, I do prefer a richer, rounder style that doesn't make me pucker. Alcohol of about 13% is perfect because I'm asking my wine to be a cocktail. With food, I want a wine to be more acidic, less alcoholic, so I can taste the flavors in the dish. It's like the difference between attending a concert and putting on some soft music as background while I'm working. At the tasting, I'm sampling my 47th Chilean Cabernet. A crimson flower blooms inside my mouth. Its fiery tendrils are licking at the back of my throat. I think my lips are starting to peel off. I've definitely lost a layer of enamel from my teeth. Bathing them in acidity for 5 hours will do that. For the drive home, I'm not calling a cab, I'm calling an ambulance. This physical anguish gets me thinking about the health implications of high alcohol wine. The recommended daily maximum consumption is 3 to 4 units of alcohol for men, 2 to 3 for women. A unit of alcohol is 8 milligrams or a 5-ounce glass of a modest 9% wine. When wine's alcohol content creeps up, it's more difficult to stick to these guidelines. That's especially true if you use large glasses that are the best for smelling wine. A 5-ounce pour looks downright stingy in these things. At 12.5% alcohol, men can drink 1.25 glasses and women 0.93 glasses, less than one. And at 15%, men reach their daily intake with just slightly over a glass, and women a measly 3/4 of a glass. Ugh, ow. To make matters more confusing, you can't always trust the alcohol level printed on the bottle. For example, American wines use the honor system when reporting alcohol levels, mainly because the labels must be approved by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and printed before the final alcoholic content of the wine is known, usually at bottling. So, the Bureau allows winemakers some leeway. For wines of less than 14%, producers are allowed to indicate a level that's up to 1.5% higher or lower than the actual figure. A wine labeled as 12.5%, for example, could actually have as little as 11% or as much as 14%. Wines of 14% and higher, there's only a 1% tolerance upwards. So a wine labeled 15% could be 16%. There's also the tax incentive for claiming a lower level of alcohol. Wineries pay 1.07% a gallon in federal excise tax for wines under 14.1%, $1.57 for those between 14.1 and 21%, and $3.15 for those in the range of 21.1% and 24%. So are high alcohol wines here to stay? I don't see their popularity diminishing anytime soon. Today's Coca-Cola generation of young adults are looking for sweet, robust drinks in the same way that the 1980s and 90s generation got their kicks from cocktails. What about the burgeoning markets in China, Brazil, and India? How will their taste affect the worldwide style of wine? What can we do? Well, I'm not a neo-prohibitionist, but I would like to see the alcohol content given more prominence on front labels and a font that's larger than mice type. I'd also love to see alcohol levels noted in restaurant wine lists. In fact, I've started asking servers about it when ordering. Although I don't advocate cigarette-style health warnings on labels, I do believe that we have a right to know what we're drinking and to be aware of its impact on our health and our senses. The good news is that, stylistically, there have been moves for lower alcohol wines, whether it's cool climate Chardonnay, natural wines, orange wines. All of those tend to be lower alcohol and are really gaining in popularity. That may also be why Pinot Grigio and Rosé are very popular these days as well. So by this time at the tasting, I've crawled back across this desert of bottles to the end of the tasting. I remember all the times I've tried to convince my friends that tasting wine is really hard work. An amused smile is usually the response, or they just laugh at me. I wish they could see me now. My cheeks glow like red-hot metal. My mouth is a fire-blackened building. As I leave the tasting and my taxi pulls up, a light drizzle lifts the heat off my skin. Nothing so small has ever felt so good. That's the pleasure of wine, too. It refreshes us gently, drop by drop. All right, well, in the show notes, you'll find the full transcript, how you can join me in a free online wine and food pairing class, and where you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube Live every second Wednesday at 7 p.m. That's all in the show notes at nataliemaclean.com/114. Well, you won't want to miss next week. I'm going to be chatting with Jane Anson, the world's foremost authority on Bordeaux wine. She's the author of the newly published Inside Bordeaux, which has received multiple glowing reviews and has been named Best Book of the Year by several newspapers. That's not just Best Wine Book, that's Best Book, because it's so good. You'll have a chance to win a personally signed copy of it. I'll give you those details next week. Jane is also the author of Club of Nine, Angelus, Bordeaux Legends, A History of the 1855 First Growth Wines, and the co-author or translator of over a dozen wine and travel books. She's also the Bordeaux correspondent and columnist for Decanter magazine, and you're going to learn so much about what's happening in Bordeaux right now from her, where the best wines are, the best overlooked vintages, terrific values. You do not have to overpay for Bordeaux, plus some surprising and really colorful stories about the region's history. So in the meantime, if you missed episode 50, go back and take a listen. I chat more about pairing wine and chocolate to get you warmed up for Valentine's Day. I'll share a short clip with you now to whet your appetite. A lot of wine lovers don't even bother to combine wine and chocolate. They feel that the rich sweetness of chocolate is just too much for any wine. But I love to layer my vices if I can. One vice is never enough. So I'm determined to find some good pairings. The overarching principle, as always, is that the wine should be sweeter than the dessert or the sweet thing. Otherwise, the wine is going to taste bitter by comparison. That's no matter what. Eating chocolate, a fruit flan, anything like that. Dark chocolate, as you can imagine, is the easiest chocolate to pair with wine. If you like this episode, please tell one friend about it, especially one who'd be interested in the trends about alcohol in wine. Thank you for taking the time to join me here. I hope something great is in your glass this week. Perhaps a zesty, refreshing, low-alcohol Pinot Noir, or hey, knock yourself out with a high-octane red. You don't want to miss one juicy episode of this podcast, especially the secret, full-bodied bonus episodes that I don't announce on social media. So, subscribe for free now at nataliemclean.com/subscribe. Meet me here next week. Cheers.